Hey everybody, Freddy here with another video. We are continuing with the series on observability. Now in this video, we're going to get into monitoring. Let's go ahead and get into the idea of what is monitoring. So, what is monitoring? Monitoring is systematic collection, analysis, and use of data to ensure that a system is operating as intended. In the monitoring realm, we have a life cycle of data. First, the data is generated. How is generated? There's many ways to generate data. A lot of times it's a log, which means that the operating system is creating the log. If you're looking at a Linux system, you can be, maybe taking the syslog, or you can be taking the kernel log. There's a lot of logs that are created in the Linux environment. If you're looking at a Windows environment, the performance log, there's the Windows log, and there's a lot of different logs that are generated. So when we look at the generation, again, there's logs that are generated, there are metrics that are generated, and we haven't looked at the definition of those three, and we will in a minute. Right now, I just want to show you that in the monitoring realm, there is a life cycle, which is the generation of the data, which could be logs, metrics, traces. Then there is a collector. The collector is the one that collects the data, puts it into a database, or puts it into some sort of database-like system. And then after that, there is something that monitors the data. And then you analyze the data. So if you're looking at metrics, for example, something that would be a metric would be like CPU utilization. And you got to analyze that data that comes in. And then you got to report based on that data. A lot of times this is where you have thresholds that say if the CPU utilization reaches greater than 80%, you need to send a message to somebody. This is the reporting. And again, there is the generation of data. So this is the whole data life cycle that happens when you're looking at observability, in this case, monitoring specifically. So when we look at Azure itself, Azure has a lot of different areas, and we will cover all these areas. But when we look at the metrics, logs, traces, this is where the data is created. Like, for example, when we look at the data sources on the left-hand side, an application could be generating that data. Infrastructure could be creating that data. The Azure platform itself could be creating that data, or there could be custom sources. Maybe you have a FluentD device that is sending data. Maybe you have other type of system that is creating that data that it goes into, like the metrics, for example, the logs and the traces. Once that data is collected, then it goes into typically what we call the log analytics workspace, which is that database that I was talking about, a database-like system where you save the data. And then after that, of course, you have insights we will get into. You can visualize the data either using workbooks, dashboards, Power BI, Grafana. You can analyze the data, an area where we're analyzing what monitor is and how it fits into the whole picture. When we're looking at the types of data that is being generated, typically we're looking at this type of data, which is metrics and logs. So it's a very simplistic way of looking at things. What are metrics? Metrics are typically numerical values. They're very lightweight, and they're collected at interval or regular intervals. A metric could be, for example, a CPU utilization. When you say, okay, what is my CPU utilization at this moment? It's a numerical value, 80%, 60%, 30%, 40%. You can say, what is the memory utilization at this moment? Memory utilization is 16 gigabytes, 32 gigabytes. There's just a specific number that is generated. How many? Another typical metric that we look at is disk I/O, for example. To analyze if the disk is too slow, you look at the disk and you say, okay, what is my disk queue length? If it's greater than 1, it means that maybe the disk is too slow. So those are metrics that you collect, and you're collecting at a different interval. Like, for example, you can collect them every 30 seconds. You can collect them every minute. There is this notion of collection period, or sampling, as we call it. Sampling is something that you got to keep an eye on, which is how often you're collecting these metrics. You don't want to collect them too quick, or every second unless you have to, because if you collect them every second, that means that you're going to have a lot of data. If you collect them every 30 seconds, then maybe you're going to miss something. So there's different thresholds that you might want to set in this case. So again, metrics are typical numerical values. And again, they're very lightweight, like CPU utilization, memory utilization, disk IO, which is like disk queue length, network IO, how many bits per minute, how many bytes per minute are at this very moment. That will give you an idea on how the network is doing, how much data you're sending through the link. Little details like that. Logs, on the other hand, are structured data or structured telemetry from different sources. They have more data, not just a numerical value. It's not like CPU utilization 80%. Logs collect data from applications, operating systems. Typically, they have a lot more information, like at what time and what happened. So a log entry is like if there's an error that was created when the application was running, typically that information is going to go into the log. So logs typically have a lot more data that needs to be generated and needs to be created and needs to be stored as well. So the data collected, again, data collected can come from many multiple sources, like infrastructure. Infrastructure is one of the things that we will focus, which typically talks about containers. If you're using AKS as one of the services for containers, then you're going to be able to see that information coming in, which typically means that you're going to interact with something like Prometheus, for example. Prometheus is one of those services that allows you to monitor containers. But it's also another thing that you can check, which is the operating system. All that data collected, all those sources are the ones that we're going to be looking at.